Mr. Secretary, we're back. We're talking about the elections in Florida and election reform and your recommendations to the legislature. You said, I believe in the first segment, that the overriding problem, the main problem with delays in voting was the length of the ballot. Talk about an example of that and how it really did make for serious delays.
Well, as I conducted my interviews around the state of Florida, there was a universal subject being the one problem being the length of the ballot. Some counties had 4 ballot pages. When you go to more urban areas like Dade County, the ballot length with the languages that had to be on it was 12 pages long. Just managing that many pages as a voter is challenging, and then as an administrator, running them through the tabulators, keeping them separate, it's a lot of paper. So the number one thing that we heard was the length of the ballot was a contributing factor to the length of the lines in the administration of the election. So in our recommendations to the governor and to the legislature, we're recommending 75 words as a summary for each constitutional amendment that's on the ballot. There were 11 this year. It would be very difficult to limit the legislature, be unconstitutional to limit the number of constitutional amendments that they could put on there on the ballot. So we're recommending that the legislature live by what they passed for citizens' initiatives, which is 75 words. If it's good enough for the citizens, it should be good enough for the legislature.
So all of those amendments that were lengthy and so forth were put on there by the legislature itself?
They were. That's correct.
Are you getting any feedback at this point from the legislature?
You know, the legislature likes flexibility. There's some consideration to, of course, you know, each constitutional amendment has to go to the Supreme Court for review and approval. There's some conversation about that the legislature wouldn't be limited by the 75 words, or that in current law, if the Supreme Court rejects a section or an amendment, that it would go to the Attorney General and she could rewrite, or he could rewrite the language for the ballot. That happened one time this year where the court rejected one of the portions of the constitutional amendment and the Attorney General rewrote it and it was on the ballot. So there's conversation. This is an important part for the legislature who's trying to do the right thing in expressing needs for change in our Constitution. And I think we'll have a pretty healthy debate, but I think that we'll come to a compromise, and I'm hoping it'll be the State Department's recommendation.
All right, Mr. Secretary, another phenomenon that people may not know about other than people closely watching the election process and the political process is in-person absentee ballots, where people actually fill out the ballots in the supervisor's office. That doesn't quite sound logical, in-person absentee, but talk about that and what a phenomenon it's become.
Well, Florida has a lot of options. First, Florida is one of 26 states that allows early voting. Absentee voting has been around for a long time, and it used to be you had to have a doctor's excuse to get one. But as we've evolved, as people have wanted change, they've started using the absentee ballot as a way to vote conveniently rather than going to the voting precinct. And so what happened this year is that because of the length of the ballot, and because of the promotion to get out, vote early, et cetera, that people were voting the absentee ballot in record numbers. And as we got closer to the election and on election day, people, rather than going to their precincts, were going to the election offices, getting a copy of the ballot, sometimes filling out the ballot in the election office or going to the parking lot, come back and turn it in. In Dade County, on the Monday before the election and on election day, there were 56,000 absentee ballots turned into the election office. And what that does is it changes the dynamic of an administrator from the polling places, the precincts, to the experience in the office. And 56,000 ballots is a lot of ballots to count. I might say and add this, that of the election ballots that were cast in absentee, early voting, and on election day, they were all counted on election night. But it created a problem for the election system in Florida for those people that were voting on election day and that day before. So we're going to make some recommendations in our report to try to move that process back a little bit to get ballots in people's hands sooner, to discourage people from going to the supervisor's office and voting absentee on election day. They should go to their precinct. That's where they need to vote. That's where they should vote. And I think the combination of these recommendations will go a long way to shortening lines and eliminating lines in a lot of cases.
That delay in counting votes, I think, caused some criticism from the media, probably who did not understand exactly what was happening in terms of in-person absentee voting.
Exactly. You know, with a record turnout of 8.5 million people, Florida, the vote between the two presidential candidates boiled down to 73,000 votes. The networks were not able to call the election on election night and weren't for 3 or 4 days. But I have to say, Florida supervisors met all the deadlines for reporting of the election results, both on election day, following election day, of these absentee ballots, except for one county. But it was the networks that wanted to call this election on election night. So I'm proud of our supervisors. We did the right thing. They followed the law, and the networks may not have liked that, but the more we can count early votes, get people voting early, and then going to their precincts on election day, the better off we are. And I think our recommendations go a long way to accomplishing that.
All right, let's just go through those very rapidly, okay? I'm just going to
fire away.
Walk down the list, and you just make a brief comment, and we'll let you make your pitch to the legislature. Sure. Number one, extend the early voting schedule.
168 hours of voting time collectively, more time than in the history of Florida.
Number two, expand the definition of an early voting site.
Expand the number of locations where people are going to vote. More sites means more convenience for voters.
Limit ballot length.
Let's do for the legislature what they do for citizens in limiting the number of words on the ballot.
And then, those are basically the three most important. And then you've got some recommendations for effective election administration, what the supervisors need to be doing, basically. Absentee ballot voting, establish an earlier time frame for absentee ballot mailings and requests, and an earlier time frame to canvass absentee ballot, what we were just talking about.
Exactly. And you know, the important thing is that there are counties that do an outstanding, exceptional job. Most of them do a very good job. But one of the things we can always learn is how to do it better. So we are proposing also that the legislature give authority to the supervisors and the State Department more opportunities for future education, best practices training. And if we can do that, supervisors will improve, and the demand by the electorate will be met for early voting, absentee voting, and voting on election day.
Well, Mr. Secretary, you're not only Florida's chief election officer, but you're also Florida's chief cultural officer, and we have a spot about a special commemoration that's about to happen.
This moment in Florida history is brought to you by the Florida Humanities Council.
In 1513, Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon reached the Florida peninsula and claimed it for Spain. But more than likely, earlier European slave ships had encountered it first. And King Fernando II's charter authorizing the voyage made no mention of a fountain of youth. Despite these myths, Ponce de Leon stumbled upon what he thought was an island he named La Florida, the flowery land. The island turned out to be a huge peninsula we still call Florida today.
Tell us about this commemoration that we're celebrating, in a sense, or at least recognizing Florida is a very special place.
Well, Florida is a place like no other place in the United States. It's the first place where Eastern Europeans landed in 1513. So we're commemorating a 500-year anniversary of that in 2013. But we must never forget that prior to that, that the Native Americans were here 10,000 years before that. But the first Eastern European settlement contact was in 1513, in and around April 2nd. And we're commemorating that on behalf of Florida being the first real state in the country.
Well, one of the things that sometimes we forget is the history of Florida. And your department has a very special role in opening up that history to Floridians and anyone else. Talk about the Museum of History and other projects that you're involved in, and just a minute also about some of your partners.
Well, Viva Florida is an incredible experience as a teachable moment for Floridians and people that come here from all over the world. I like to tell people that the Museum of Florida History here at the Gray Building in Tallahassee is a moment in which people can walk through the entire history of Florida, from the early Native Americans all the way through modern time of the space capsule launches. And that experience is something that's wonderful that we can share with all of our friends here in Florida. But Viva Florida gives us a chance to showcase and spotlight that. And the wonderful thing is that the State Department is the lead agency appointed by the governor to begin to build that. When we started this effort 5 years ago, we had about 4 partners. Now we have over 1,500 local partners.
Wow.
We have over 300 events planned, and anybody that's interested can go and look at our website.
Say that for us.
VivaFlorida.org. VivaFlorida.org.
Okay.
And every day at that website, we're getting 3 to 5 new events that are occurring. And this is a real grassroots experience where people in communities are wanting to commemorate the diversity in their community, the history that they've done to contribute to Florida's rich history, whether they're Spanish or French or agricultural. You know, a lot of people don't know that Florida would not have oranges or cattle had it not been for the Spanish. They brought them here. And we have a lot to share, and we have a lot to give as an example to the world on how a culture can live with such diversity of religion, ethnic backgrounds. When I look around the world and see the conflict, Florida is a wonderful, shining example to the world about our diversity and how we live together.